Hey there, extraordinary treasurers. In previous videos, we learned that the local funds are to be created by the board, not by the donors. And you as a treasurer are not to create a new local fund in Jewel just because a donor writes it on their tithe envelope. We have a term for donations that are given by the donor for a specific purpose. We call them trust funds. They can also be called restricted funds or donor-designated funds. It means that your church board is being trusted to hold the donated funds and not use them for anything else until they can be used the way that the donor intended. The restrictions on the use of trust funds is not something that the auditors dreamed up to complicate your life. No, the IRS has very specific guidelines on what is a tax-deductible donation, and there are two key elements. Number one, the donor must relinquish control of the donation. And number two, the board must exercise administrative control over it. That might make it sound like the board can do what they want with it because the donor has given it up. But the Attorney General of your state enforces the donor's right to expect that the organization will use the money for what it was intended. Also, there's this quote from the Seventh-day Adventist Church Manual. All offerings and gifts contributed by individuals for a specific fund or purpose must be used for that purpose. Neither the treasurer nor the board has the authority to divert any funds from the objective for which they were given. Page 84. So to illustrate it this way, again thinking of church funds as buckets, the church board exercises administrative control by creating the buckets. The donor chooses which bucket they want to put their money in, then relinquishes control of their offering. They can't come back and say, I changed my mind, I want my money back. Or they can't say, I changed my mind, I want to put it in a different bucket. The board then honors the expectation of the donor and uses the money from each bucket appropriately. Children's ministries might pay for VBS expense. Worthy student, tuition. Sabbath school expense pays for quarterlies, while church budget, which can be used wherever it's needed, can pay for utilities and cleaning supplies. So to put all this together in a very practical way, once a donor donates to an account, such as summer camp assistance or a worthy student, the board cannot use that money for another purpose, ever. Even if it was donated 5 years ago and you no longer have kids who go to summer camp or church school. What about if you really need it? Say your utilities account is in the negative several $1,000s and the summer camp assistance fund has $5,000 in it and has not been touched since 2013. So the board says to you, transfer the money out of summer camp into utilities. I call this a sideways transfer, moving money from one expense account to another. Problem is, if your donors donated that money to summer camp assistance, your board cannot use it to pay the electric bill. You can send local children to your local conference camp. You can send somebody's grandkid to camp in another conference. You can donate it directly to Colorado Springs to sponsor other people's children, but you can't pay the electric bill with it. Now that we know that putting money in a bucket can have consequences even years down the road, how should your church board decide what buckets to create? Well, one thing you should know, from my perspective anyway, it is possible to have too many buckets. I've seen churches that have hundreds of local funds, and their financial summary report is pages and pages long. Detail has been elevated way, way above clarity and simplicity. And this often results in small amounts of trapped money in lots of teeny tiny buckets. More is not always better. Clarity enables the board to see what is going on, but too much detail can actually hinder clarity. We'll be talking about balancing detail and simplicity in an upcoming video. Also, having too many buckets also creates a very complicated and time-consuming system for the treasurer to operate, always transferring money from this bank account to that bank account, from this fund to another fund. In most cases, it's better to have clearly defined categories like one remodeling projects bucket that's used to fund multiple projects rather than having small amounts of money left over in a bunch of funds after various projects are completed. There are a few trust fund buckets that require special handling. Here are some that we have seen that can be complicated. Special projects supporting an independent missionary. There's some very specific rules that must be followed when a church supports an independent missionary directly, one who's not under the oversight of a mission board like OCI or AFM. If your church is considering doing this, please contact Greg Levitt, our Director of Auditing, and he can help you understand what is involved and how to handle it. Collecting money for another 501c3, another nonprofit, is a bucket that can require special handling. The local church policy manual says no charitable contribution receipt is to be given by the local church for organizations not listed in the Seventh-day Adventist yearbook. If a donor puts 3ABN on their tithe envelope, or Quiet Hour, or Maranatha, or some other independent ministry, you shouldn't immediately create a fund for that donation. The donor really needs to be informed that they need to donate directly to that entity and not go through the local church. That you can't give them a tax-deductible receipt for their donation to a ministry that's not under the umbrella of the General Conference. Special appeals to benefit a specific individual. Well-meaning members, and even sometimes the pastor, will make a spur-of-the-moment appeal from the front on Sabbath morning for donations to help a specific person with something like emergency medical bills or car expenses, and they expect the treasurer to create a new local fund, keep track of the donations, write the person in need a check, and give receipts for those donations. Well, there's a couple of problems here. The board did not create that bucket, and the IRS is very clear that contributions to individuals are never tax deductible. Your members should be trained to take those appeals to the board or to the benevolence committee first so they can be handled properly. The pastor's discretionary fund requires special handling as well. There's a right way to set it up so that the money is not considered as income to the pastor. An auditor can help you know how to do it correctly. A good question to ask with any unusual bucket: is this project in keeping with the mission of our local church? If you have any unusual funds under consideration, or if your church is thinking about using trust funds outside of how they were originally intended, it's best to contact an auditor for assistance so we can help you avoid the improper use of your trust funds. There's a lot more you can learn about church budgeting in the next 3 videos, so I hope you'll keep watching.